Hello and welcome to What a Scream. Now, for anyone that hasn't listened or watched us before, this is the podcast where myself, your host, Golly Miss Dolly, chats about horror movies with a special guest every week. And in particular, we chat about horror movies that have to do with a particular theme or subject matter that I have randomly chosen previously. So previously we have had stuff like British folk horror or Christianity versus paganism. The very first episode was about female killers. So basically anything can come out of my pile of subjects that I have. So this week, my special guest is photographer Natalie Greer of Boudoir Girls. I have known them for quite a while. I've worked with them on photo shoots, and they are just a big horror nerd like myself. We have created some fantastic sets together to do with horror and dark kind of stuff. And this week, the theme that I pulled out, or the theme that we kind of decided to do, was 80s vampire films. So in the 80s, we saw this kind of resurgence of vampire films, but they kind of brought vampires into what was the modern era of the 80s. So they kind of upgraded the vampire. They became very sexy, very almost based on teenagers, because obviously during the 80s we had MTV, we had this huge kind of pop culture explosion. And so that kind of mirrored itself with the vampire film in the 80s. And not only that, but we can also see perhaps the AIDS crisis of the 80s as well influenced the vampire film, which again, you know, it has correlations between sex and a blood disease. So as always, throughout history, when it comes to horror films, we see this kind of mirror of what society at the time is going through. So this week, the films we chose to do were 1986's Vamp, directed by Richard Wenk and starring the great, the absolute sublime, holy being that is Grace Jones, and 1987's Joel Schumacher directed The Lost Boys, absolute classic. So we discussed those two films in spoiler detail, just in case you haven't seen them. Go away, watch them before you listen to us. And if you have watched them, or you just, you know, don't really care about watching them, which is fine, enjoy my chat here with Natalie. I would like to welcome to the podcast Natalie Greer. How are you?
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yes, I knew I needed to have you on because you are a fellow horror nerd such as myself.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. And I love discussing it like that with like-minded people. So it's a really cool podcast. I love it.
Thank you. It's good to talk to someone outside of your own household.
Absolutely. I agree. Yes. It's so it's such strange times. So it's giving people a little lift, I think, at the moment to be able to discuss horror films and things there, you know, and rewatch them as well, because we've had to go back over some of them, and it's great.
So for anyone who doesn't know you, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. The name is Natalie Greer, and I'm a portrait photographer, and a lot of people might know me for Boudoir Girls, which is like a pin-up and boudoir photography, like a makeover company. And so basically I bring a little bit of fantasy in there with themed photo shoots for hen parties, or just for women, empowering women as well. So it's a mixture really of different things, but I get to incorporate the horror into it at times. At Halloween, my favorite time, and obviously shooting with you, we've done a lot of pin-up stuff together, which has been amazing. And we've got to kind of, I suppose, live our dreams a little bit with different sets, you know, between Lost in Space and coffin sets and different things. So it gives me an opportunity to kind of incorporate the horror into it from time to time, you know. So it's a great outlet.
It's always great fun coming to shoot with you.
Oh, thank you. And likewise, again, it's great when, you know, when you see somebody that's really into horror and be able to, that they know every movie you're thinking of recreating. It's super fun.
Yeah. And so how did you get into horror? Do you remember what your first horror film was?
Sure. I think the first one, the really beginning of it would have been the original Clash of the Titans, 1981, I think it was. And I remember seeing it on television and thinking, you know, that was just so cool. It had unicorns, it had Medusa in it, the Kraken, the whole lot. And I wanted to take Andromeda as my confirmation name. So it was really funny. My parents actually let me ask the priest about that. But it was a bit of a no-go in Irish Catholicism. It wasn't a saint's name, so that wasn't happening. But that would have been the intro into it originally, I think. And then over time, I suppose the thrill of getting to stay up late and watch V, which was a really big 80s series that came on to RTE, and it was literally the talk of Ireland, or the talk of the world, really, because it was, I guess, the first one like it, apart from maybe the Twilight Zone or things like that, you know. And then from there, it was just a love of video shops and all that kind of stuff that led me into it further. And I guess The Exorcist would be my memory of the scariest one that I would have come across accidentally watching the satellite TV page when I shouldn't have been, and having it switched off, like my parents saying, you know, you can't watch that, it's a bit too scary. But eventually getting to see it. So they were the roots of it.
We talk a lot about, I've noticed that, you know, interviewing guests, that the video shop is a very shared experience amongst kind of our generation and before, especially going into video shops, reading the back covers and being really freaked out by the artwork. It's kind of funny that that's like a shared experience for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Yes. I pity the younger people in a way that they never got to experience it. And I often discuss it with my teens, but I do walk them through it, what it was like when, you know, it was kind of a cool place to hang out. But maybe when you were a kid, no more than when you were describing it, you were a bit scared initially when you're walking in and you see these massive, scary posters of the one that sticks out in my mind. The very first poster I think I would have seen in a video shop was The Lift or something like that. And then maybe Amityville and The Omen, those kind of ones. And just, as you say, picking up and looking at the back of the video itself was a real experience, you know. It would horrify you, but you couldn't put them down. And then I guess as you get older, it was just a cool place to hang out and meet other friends in there and just spend hours in it. It was really cool.
It's a shame that like Gen Zers will not get to experience that. You know, all they have is kind of flicking through Netflix or whatever streaming site there is. You know, they don't have that actual physical experience, and it's such a shame because it's great.
You're so right. It is a shame for them, but I guess they get to maybe do the Comic Cons now or things, you know. Again, you'd be looking for ways of how do they express it now, you know. And as you say, they kind of follow the YouTubers, and there's a lot of cool stuff on YouTube that I guess we would have loved to have in our time. But I think that's why we maybe fell in love with movies a lot more and the characters, and we lived it so much. Like I'd become obsessed with movies after watching them, and it just really stuck with me. Anytime I'd see a film like that or a fantasy or a horror movie, it absolutely took over me because you just rewatch them. It's really all you had for doing. Just play them over or, you know, listen to music and then wait for your favorite songs to come on the television. You just didn't have that immediate access, so you just appreciated it so much more.
Yeah, like absolutely. I think you're 100% correct with, everything is so accessible nowadays. If you want to watch a film, you can just go online and get it within seconds. Whereas with our generation, we had to wait for it to come out on video, and then we had to wait for the video shop to get that video in. And then, we watched it obsessively until we had to give the video back. So that's what shaped us into these obsessive kind of people, because we didn't have immediate access to things. We had to work harder to get things.
Completely. Even to get memorabilia, like in Galway, there wouldn't have been. Eventually we got Chivago Records, which was again another cool spot to hang out and look at the records and everything. But for quite a few years, like I remember the trip to Dublin was like a pilgrimage, because it was a 4-hour trip. It was a nightmare, and you'd have select shops that might do some memorabilia. So I've actually still kept some of my posters and tapes and things that I would have got up there. But there was only very select shops for specific types of things, or even to dress a bit like heavy metal-ish or things like that, to get t-shirts. And stuff. It was a really cool shop years ago in Asha, upstairs in the Airspace Centre, in the St. Stephen's Green Centre. And it was just, I think once a year I'd managed to make the trip up to Dublin and just get a few things while I was up there. But it was such a big deal. You'd come home and you'd just literally be so appreciative of it. And again, obsessed with it.
Yeah. The media, it seems like the media that we consumed, millennials kind of, and before, the media we consumed was not as disposable as it kind of seems a bit today. Gen Zers, they're great. Like, don't get me wrong, they're absolutely amazing because of the technology. But it seems like a lot of the media is very, very disposable. They wouldn't have as much, what's the word? Like a connection almost. The same way we would.
That's it. Yeah. I think we'd even get obsessive about characters. If you had a crush on somebody, like literally, I went up to the attic there during COVID, and I was pulling out, I had a box of my teenage bedroom up there. And it was really cool to find it. I forgot I had it actually, because we moved house in, I suppose, over the last, while. And literally it was a box of notes, the jewelry I would have worn then, and my school journal was in it. But the school journal was like a gold mine, because it actually gave me such insight into how we, in class you'd be talking about the films and writing in the journal as if to say, did you see that movie last night, and did you write her? It was so innocent really, but the whole journal was actually filled with pictures, between different horror films and the quotes from them, and you just would absorb so much of it, the dress sense, the everything, and be obsessed with some of the, I have to say, I always fancied the baddies in the roles. My friends always fancied the good guys and the Rob Lowe's, and I always loved, say, the Kiefer Sutherlands or these types. So we'd be fighting over who'd have who, and it was just there were fun times, and innocent too. But as you say, the Gen Zs are a lot more on it now in terms of technology. They're shit hot at all that. They're very on it. They're go-getters, I think. Whereas I just would have spent hours, and I still do, would spend hours on my own in the bedroom, like watching movies and kind of absorbing things. But it's a different time.
So talking of nostalgia, our theme for this week is 80s vampire movies, and you yourself, you're a big 80s horror film buff, aren't you? Like, that is that's your thing.
I love it. I'm all for 80s naffness and cheesy music, and definitely the horror movies resonate with me, I guess, again, because I would have grown up with it, and I would have been so obsessed with it back in the day. So I do love them all. I have to say.
And we saw with the 80s, kind of vampires got a bit of a makeover. They weren't such kind of, we moved from this idea of like a vampire being from the olden days, from, very gothic kind of 1800s. whereas the 80s brought the vampires into the modern era and they made them very sexy, very now, very, you know, of the MTV generation.
Yes, absolutely. I think they really did. And that was, I think The Lost Boys was the first movie to do that. To make them a little bit sexier and kind of vamp it up, and the clothes and everything. A lot of that was down to Joel Schumacher. Being a costumer in his day. He used to, you know, create costumes and sets. So he kind of had the look for how that movie would come across. And it really was that era where vampires became really good looking and cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Do you want to give us a quick synopsis about The Lost Boys? Perhaps introduce it to us before we discuss it.
Okay, so The Lost Boys is directed by Joel Schumacher. It's based around Lucy. She's like a divorcee mom, and she moves to a small little town in California called Santa Carla, and she has the two teenage boys with her. So you have Sam and Michael, who's the hot kind of, I suppose he would look like the singer of the Doors, really. Looking back now, I never even noticed him in that movie because all I could see was Kiefer Sutherland. But it's only now that I'm looking at it and I'm going, oh my God, he was actually beautiful looking. But I just never saw it. But so basically they moved to Santa Carla, which is the murder capital of the world. And the town happens to be riddled with bikers and kind of bikers / vampires, really hot ones. And and then basically Michael falls victim to, well, he falls in love with Star, who's basically betrothed to one of these vampires, and then his brother has to help him overcome the undead and rescue everybody. So that is the storyline of it. And like that, it's just one of those movies that's, I think it created a generation of us that just wanted to dress like that and be like them. It was just so amazing.
I mean, this film was pretty much the antithesis of 80s. I mean, it had an all-star cast with Corey Haim, Corey Feldman, Jason Patric, Kiefer Sutherland, Diane West, Edward Herrmann, and my personal favorite, Alex Winter. I adore Alex Winter. Yeah,
really? Wow.
I know everyone loved Jason Patric and Kiefer Sutherland. I loved Alex Winter.
Yeah, and Billy Wirth, again, he was beautiful in it. He was a model that was brought into that movie, but I've never heard anybody say they loved Alex Winter.
Really?
So it's funny.
I love it. I loved him as Marco. His hair was so beautiful, and like I loved him from Bill and Ted as well. So that's where you know, my love from him. I know everyone loves. Yeah, but it's just so 80s. You know, we've got Corey Haim. Corey Haim plays one of the brothers, doesn't he? I always get mixed up between him and Corey Feldman.
Okay. So Corey Feldman is the more, I guess, Michael Jackson-esque. He later went on to kind of be in a lot of music videos and hang out with Michael Jackson a lot. And Corey Haim, he was the real cuter, the younger brother with Nanook, the dog. And he collaborates with the Frog Brothers in it. So their characters are very much based on the Rambo of the time. I remember Corey Feldman had to really watch a lot of the superheroes of that time and the kind of, you know, action heroes, shall we say. So he really took on the role as the vampire hunters and the kind of Sylvester Stallone type. And then Corey Haim, he was beautiful actually. He was such a cute little kid. It was sad to see what became of him later and the drugs and everything, but in the movie he's really cute. He has a lot of funny one-liners and the comedic factor, he does it so well. And then it was the start of the two Coreys as well, where the two of them ended up starring in a load of movies after it. After The Lost Boys, they went on to make, I think, 2 or 3 films together.
But it was very much the peak. It was, you know, the MTV generation. And I guess we could see it in the theme of The Lost Boys. You know, this, obviously it's based on Peter Pan and this theory of never growing old. And obviously that mirrors with vampirism. But, you know, it came at a time where everyone was obsessed with youth and with, you know, the youth culture that really became, you know, because of MTV, because of certain pop music, it was all about youth culture. And this film kind of just summed it up completely.
It really did. And the soundtrack.
The soundtrack.
As well. The soundtrack was amazing.
Yeah, I love the soundtrack.
Yeah, it's unreal. I remember even, did you ever fight with your friends over who'd have that as the funeral song, or what kind of funeral song you'd have? Or
because this came out in 1987, and I was born in 1989. So this film holds a really special place in my heart, because, you know, a lot of horror film fans, they say that their older siblings got them into horror. Well, mine didn't. My older sister was a lot older than me. And by the time I was getting into horror, she had moved out the house. But one summer I spent with her, I must have been about 13, 14. And she was like, you have to watch this film. You love Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You love vampires. You have to watch The Lost Boys. And she got me into it.
Okay.
So then I was the one that went back to all my friends, was like, oh my God, The Lost Boys. But a lot of them were just like, oh, really bad 80s film. And I was like, no, you don't get it. So I always feel very alone in my love for Lost Boys.
Oh, it really, I think a lot of people, again, around my age in their 40s, it resonated so much with them, because we were that generation whereby, say, where we lived in Galway, we had Salthill, and in Salthill we had the fun fair all summer, and it was like Santa Carla, and then we all dressed like that, and we were bikers, and we just were all like hairy mollies, you know, going around the place, except for the fact that you couldn't just go out and buy a really cool military jacket and Killstar. That wasn't in it. So you were there like pulling buttons off your granny's cardigan, trying to make outfits that looked really cool, you know, and rip your jeans and bleach your tops. It was a bit more handmade or stuff at the time, but definitely there's so many, I guess, of my age that would remember the nightclubbing and the music that came with it. And Joel Schumacher actually went on to direct In Excess's music video, Devil Inside.
Okay.
That's how he persuaded them to put a song into the film, actually. So it's cool when you see it, you can see his influences in it as well. But again, pure 80s. Yeah,
I'm obsessed with the soundtrack. Just that Jared McMahon song is just, I need to do a burlesque routine to it, because
that would be cool.
Adore that song.
Actually, can you hear this? I don't know, but this is the tape. So that noise of the tape cover opening and then listening or reading all the lyrics, because nobody ever knew what they were saying anyway in the songs. You'd always get it wrong. But it was really cool. It really added to it. And it just made you want to be them. And it just was cool. I know it definitely changed the course of my life after I watched it, because I just knew I wanted a motorbike. I had all these plans that didn't involve study. It just, it was so brilliant. But
and it was the film that changed vampiric culture. It was, I mean, obviously there was a lot of vampire films before it in the 80s, but this film hyped up the sexualization, it hyped up the youthfulness, and it's just you know, it inspired films like the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer film, you know, and it's it's just, I watched it again the other night, even though I've watched it a billion times, but I watched it again, and I just, if The Lost Boys was a person, I would fall madly in love with it.
Absolutely. It's just so good. My husband sometimes gets me little phone covers of it, or you know, he knows it's just one of those teenage things that I love. But so Valentine's is definitely not a time for flowers in our house. It's more weird things. But it's unreal, and it really kind of even the video shop in the movie itself, when you see Diane Wiest, she goes to work in the video shop in a scene, and you see the guys coming in and they're walking around it, and it just really gives off the, you know, the vibe of what it was like back then, and how cool it was.
Yeah. So let's talk about the little twist in the film, because obviously we are introduced to this gang of vampires who is led by David, played by Kiefer Sutherland. And Michael has been kind of brought into the gang, and he is kind of half vampire. He's not full vampire yet. And to kind of get him out of his conundrum, they have to kill the head vampire, which they assume is David. But as we know, when David is staked, it doesn't work. And so we find out that the head vampire is Edward Herman's character, who owns the video shop.
Yes,
and who is dating their mother. Yes, I loved it. Because obviously I knew him from Gilmore Girls, playing Rory's grandfather. And you just don't expect him to be the bad guy at all. But I loved it. I loved the little twist.
Absolutely, because certainly it didn't give it away when they had him to dinner and they weren't able to, they thought he was, and then they had the garlic and they had the whole lot thrown at him and he didn't turn. So again, it would lead you to believe he wasn't. So it was a good little twist at the end of it. And I think they were leaving it open with David to bring out another movie.
Yes,
they hadn't fully killed him off in it. So they were due to bring out, I think, The Lost Girls or something after it.
That was it. Yeah.
You know,
it just never came.
I'm glad they didn't. Yes. You know, I think as it is, I think if they messed with it, even the sequels, I have to say, I can't even look at them. They're just horrendous. The two, they weren't for me anyway. I just didn't. I didn't resonate with them. I think what they did originally was just so good. They, you know, they didn't need to mess with it.
Yeah.
But I did hear talks of a series coming out about it. So I don't know where that's at. But
yeah,
cool.
I mean, I'd hope that it would be good, but I just don't think they'd be able to capture the original kind of magic of it. You know, I did watch the sequel with Angus Sutherland, Kiefer Sutherland's little half brother. And it was, as you said, it's just pants, you know, it doesn't have that kind of 80s magic. I don't know. It just,
it's missing it.
Yeah. I think it's one of the greatest vampire films ever. It's probably my favorite vampire film of all time. Like, I just adore The Lost Boys. Would you recommend this film to horror fans?
Absolutely. I think, you know, if you can leave, I suppose if you can leave it at the door in terms that it is an 80s fest. Yeah. Again, my teenagers are not into the 80s look at all. Anything to the 80s, they're not. They just don't seem to. Maybe it's because I'm the mom and they're just like, no. But certainly on the whole, it's just one of those really easy watch. You know, it is comedic as well, so it's not entirely a gore fest of anything. It's a really cool movie. I would definitely recommend it to people.
I mean, it's got this great kind of balance with the comedy and with the horror. You know, it has some great horror moments. Obviously, the scene where they are eating the Chinese takeout and it turns into worms. It's one of the greatest scenes. Like, and it just balances it so well. And I think it's great. I think it's fantastic.
And even when they're in the trees and they're trying to get Michael to have his first feast. And he's turning and he's trying not to, you know, he's turned into a bit of a vampire, but he's watching them eating. And that scene was a bit of a shocker at the time because it had been so comedic up to that. And then they're like biting into heads and stuff and there's blood and they're throwing them on the fire. And you're like, okay, this got a little bit darker, but then it gets funny again. You know, it has elements of everything in it, really. For all audiences. But yeah, certainly, definitely recommend it.
Yeah, 100%. So the next film that I chose to kind of look at was a film that came out the year before. And it is Vamp, which is directed by Richard Wenk or Work. I don't know. I can't read my own writing. And again, it's another American comedy horror, but it stars the absolutely fantastic, the divine Grace Jones, and that was the reason I chose this film, because I love Grace Jones. She's
unbelievable, isn't she? She makes that movie. her presence in it, you know.
Absolutely, yeah.
Even the dance, everything in it, she commands the stage when she's on it, you know.
Yeah. So the whole storyline is there are these pledges and they are trying to get into a frat house. And they decide to forego the usual entry kind of, what do they call it? I can't remember what they call it, a pledge or a haze. That's it, a haze. And they say that they can get a stripper for a frat party. So they the two pledges, they're called Keith and AJ, and they get this other guy who has a car, Duncan, and they go into the city and they find this strip club called After Dark, and they go in to try and find a stripper. And Grace Jones comes onto the stage and she does this surreal kind of dance with, you know, like a mannequin, and it's all very art pop, and it's fantastic. I think anyone who is a performer should watch this because it's just fantastic. And then AJ goes backstage with Katrina, Grace Jones's character, and she turns into a vampire, kills him, and then his friend Keith goes looking for him, finds his body. But then AJ comes back to life as a vampire, and it's all about Keith trying to get out of this club alive, basically being chased by all these vampires. It's a great, I mean, it's no work of art kind of film, you know, it's nowhere near as amazing as Lost Boys, but you can definitely see, you know, the kind of going from a film like Vamp to the Lost Boys. You can kind of see the what's the word, the development of 80s vampire films in these two films. What do you think of Vamp?
Vamp, do you know something, when I watched it, I watched it a few days ago actually, just to kind of refresh myself. It had been years since I'd seen it, and like that, the dance scene was cool. It was really it was really interesting. What I noticed the most in it was the colors, the kind of green and the pinks throughout it, the real 80s kind of colors that you see a lot in photography now, and we've kind of gone back to all that look again, and that, you know, I find I'm using it a little bit more myself. But definitely it was interesting. Again, the script and all that wouldn't have been amazing, but it was an easy watch. It was kind of funny, and just I think she made it overall.
Absolutely.
And the other guy, the Snowball, what was his real name? I'm trying to remember what actor that was. He was in a few other movies.
Yes, he looks very familiar. I'm gonna look.
Yeah, he looks like Andrew Eldritch from the Sisters of Mercy. That he always reminded me of him. And he's always a baddie, like in every movie. I think he even turned up in Charmed in the 90s or something. But as they all did. But
Billy Drago.
Yes, that was him.
Yes,
he was in quite a few movies.
He was in Charmed. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I knew I saw a few of them pop up in it, and like that, he was funny in it. It was funny to see him. That was really nostalgia. And as you say, Grace Jones, I was just waiting for scenes with her to come on. I was kind of going, when is she going to come back into it now? Skip this bit. Bit.
Absolutely.
But her outfits in it, as you say, for performers. Point of view, even the fashion in it, when you see those harness belts and all that cool stuff, it's all in now. Everybody's wearing them, and they were wearing them in the clubs then. You know, it had a real you know, the dancers had them on, and they were just really cool.
I mean, this film is very, I wrote down Ferris Bueller meets vampires. You know, we've got the very confident AJ with his, you know, a bit more reserved friend Keith, and it's like a buddy movie basically. You know, they go on a bit of a road trip and run into some trouble, and of course we have the love kind of connection as well. You know, he meets a girl working at the strip club, and so he's got to find her. But I mean, it's a good old kind of 80s kind of romp, I guess. You know, it wouldn't be as stylized as The Lost Boys, and it's but I definitely recommend it just to see Grace Jones. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah,
She was really
100%.
good at it. But and then say the blonde girl, she was kind of a more annoying character in it.
Yes.
At one point, I thought she was going to be a vampire. Do you know,
Yeah,
when he was
same,
kind
yeah.
of testing her when
Mhm.
coming into the sunlight and stuff. I said that'd be
Yeah.
a twist now if she actually is a vampire.
Yeah.
But then she wasn't.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
it was still, as you say, it was a bit of a mix of, as you say, a buddy movie and a little
Yeah.
bit of comedy in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have to say I would have been transfixed to it for the fashion and the lighting side
Yeah.
of it, or the set, you know, the sets
Yeah.
and that kind of side of it. That was really,
Yeah.
it was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't too much horror in it. There is that bit where Grace Jones's character Katrina kills AJ, and that was probably the bloodiest we got.
Yeah.
And then we have her death scene where she's like shot with a bow and arrow, and that doesn't kill her, so they have to get the sunlight, and it's this ridiculous death scene, and it's so dramatic, and then she ends up a skeleton, and then the skeleton like gives the middle finger.
The finger.
Yeah.
And
I thought that was quite
actually
funny. Yeah. Just for how ridiculous it was.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's definitely more of a vampire comedy rather than a horror film. But
yeah,
grand nonetheless. So out of the two movies, which one are you more likely? I mean, I know what the answer is, but which one are you more likely to recommend to horror fans?
I would, obviously, I'd recommend The Lost Boys more so.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has a little bit more substance to it, as you say, a little bit more of the sets, the cast, the music. It kind of has a lot more in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you say, Vamp is kind of a good lighthearted movie. You know, there's, you know, I don't know what else to say about it. Really,
yeah. You know what?
Other than Grace Jones is great. But
I mean, everyone.
And the fact that it kind of, I think the scene where she is eating him, it reminded me a little bit of Fright Night, actually. Just you know, the type of the effects in it. There seemed to be a special effects that maybe was in Ghostbusters and Fright Night, and I think the same people would have created some of those monsters and the, you know, the slime and the gore and the way they've done it, or the ripping of throats side of it. So yeah, that's what it actually reminded me of a little bit. But yeah, as you say, it's an easy watch.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely recommend Vamp just to see Grace Jones and, you know, the powerhouse that she was and still is. But just to kind of get that look that it wasn't, she brought herself to the role. It wasn't like, oh, I'm a sexy vampire in, you know, a corset and heaving bosoms. Like, that vampire was Grace Jones all over. The whole performance was Grace Jones. And I think people should see that because, you know, it's Grace Jones. The queen.
And, she was in Conan as well, actually, another 80s movie. And she just has that warrior woman aesthetic to her. Like, she is that type of character in real life. You know, even when you see her in interviews, she has such a presence that, you know, anything she's in, she brings that to the role. So I think she's always well placed in movies. You know, they kind of cast her as a strong character in a lot of movies for that reason. She's not afraid. She was always ahead of her time. She just spoke her mind. I think she'd be the type of person you could just imagine a night out would not be boring with her. Like, she'd be just so fun, you know what I mean? And she's just so wild. But and not afraid to be herself, you know, which is something I would love, a sprinkle of that, you know, just to be able to be herself as much as she is. She's just unashamedly so.
Absolutely. I think one thing that kind of connects the two films is you almost don't want the baddies to die. You're disappointed when the baddies die. Like, I know when David died, I was like, no. And then when Katrina dies, I was like, oh, really? I'd prefer it if the good guys died. But, you know, I kind of love that connection, especially in 80s movies, 80s vampire movies, is that the baddie is so much more than just the villain, just, you know, something to conquer. It's, you can see yourself in them, or, you know, you can see aspects of who you would like to be, which is almost what, you know, vampirism is. We kind of assume that when we become vampires, or if we became vampires, you know, if they were real, that it magnifies certain aspects of our personality, whether that is sexiness, confidence, you know, it's,
yeah.
And I think that's really what the 80s was all about. It was about amplifying yourself. And I love that that kind of is characterized in these villains or vampires.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, definitely.
So, yes. So before we end, I always ask this: what is your favorite horror film and why?
So again, I would say The Lost Boys.
Yeah.
And why I definitely know it changed the course of my life after watching it. So it's a real personal movie, but it just, I suppose it just brought us such joy and such fun into our lives, you know, that that I'll always associate my teens and the fun I had with The Lost Boys.
Yeah. And what is the scariest film you've ever seen?
That's a good one. Yeah. I think there's a few of them, but I think the worst would have been Cannibal Holocaust not that long ago, in terms of it was too real, you know. But and then creepiness wise, I guess back in the day would have been The Exorcist. So it's very hard to answer. It's no more than when you asked the top 5. I was about 2 weeks thinking about it, and then I said, okay, it's too late to even answer that now because I just couldn't pin them down. But there's too many to choose from. It's like the favorite song thing, isn't it? Where you just can't, you know, our favorite bands.
Yeah. You know? I haven't seen Cannibal Holocaust. I've heard plenty about it. I probably know a lot more about it for someone who hasn't actually seen it, but I think I'm not, you know, like we have this subgenre of like horror extremes. So we've got like Cannibal Holocaust in there. We have obviously a Serbian film, Martyrs, and I haven't really watched a lot of these film extremes because I just think they're too real. They're too like, you know, it really freaks me out a bit.
Yeah, and especially it's funny because I think as a teenager I didn't really have a lot of empathy as such, but I know when I became a mom, my views on horrors changed a little bit, and then I always loved the fantasy horrors like Pan's Labyrinth and that kind of thing. It was all like gothic romantic love stories. But then when it came to the more kind of movies where people were being tortured and, you know, like Hostel, even, I loved it. I loved Tarantino. But I was literally shaking after Hostel, the adrenaline, because I just kept thinking, oh my God, there could be this like weirdo in the world that's waiting to attack one of my daughters. You know, you kind of come at it slightly differently when you become a mom, which is weird. I never expected that. But definitely they're not my favorite horrors. I tend to veer away from them usually, but sometimes curiosity might peek about a film, and then you'd say, you know, I hadn't actually researched Cannibal Holocaust before I watched it, and then when I looked at it afterwards, I went, oh my God, I knew there was a few scenes in that just looked too real, you know, that were like too real looking, and there was reason for that because some of them were. So it just was I'd definitely be sticking to the more you know, the romancy kind of hot vampire flicks, and even the 70s ones, or, you know, things like that, and the, you know, the fun aspect, that side of it. But
I'm trying to work myself up to watch these extreme movies. I think I'm gonna try Cannibal Holocaust and Martyrs. I've heard Martyrs is very like life-changing. Like really like, you know,
I'm not gonna watch that.
Disturbs you. I think I'm just gonna do it. I just, you know, I think I have to do it. I'm not gonna do a Serbian film because I've read about it and I'm just not interested. Like I'm absolutely not interested in it. But I think I'm gonna try. I'm gonna give it a go. I didn't watch Hostel because, well, I watched a little bit of it But you know, one of the scenes where the guy gets his Achilles tendon slit?
Yes.
Turned it off. I was like, no,
Oh.
I'm done. That's it. I don't need to watch this. I turned it straight off. I was like, no, anything to do with feet, I'm just like,
yes, it was vile, wasn't it? But did you find then being a mom changed, you know, did you find it changed your views on horrors at all when, you know, after you became a mother? Did you find you were watching them through different eyes at all?
Absolutely. Like, even I chatted with director Aisling Clarke a couple of weeks ago, and the theme was parenthood. And we chatted about the Babadook. So I watched the Babadook before I was a mom, and I was very much like, yeah, it's grand, you know, the kid's a little bit annoying and, you know, whatever. And then when I watched it after going through depression and being a parent and how difficult that is, I came at it with completely different eyes. And now it's like one of my favorite films, because you just look at it from, you know, you look at that character and you think, okay, I've been her. Like, I know what it's like, and I find myself empathizing a lot more. But other than that, not really. I mean, a few times I'm a little bit more squeamish, I think, but you know, especially when it comes to the real kind of horror. But
that would be the biggest difference I find too, is if it looks too real, or if it's human torture, I think is just the biggest thing I find. It has turned me a bit again. When we used to watch all this stuff like years ago, or those zombie movies and Day of the Living Dead, and there was any amount of like gore in it after nightclubs, you know, you come home and flick them on after the clubs and you'd just be watching them, and there was just no feeling in it. But definitely as time goes on, you do look at them slightly different. Or there was one I watched that kind of caught me by surprise, was Bone Tomahawk. I don't know.
Okay, I haven't watched that.
That, oh my God, there's an ending to it that I was actually disturbed for weeks after seeing it. I'd rather I didn't watch it.
Oh, really? But, okay.
Yeah, it's just one of those, it's kind of one of those Western themed movies with these kind of barbaric creatures in it. And it just doesn't seem like it's going to take it's a bit creepy, but it doesn't seem like it's going to go too bad.
And then it does.
Then it does.
Yeah.
So do not watch the end of it if you're any bit prone to that kind of stuff. You know, it's full on.
Okay, now I want to watch it.
Now you want to watch it, just with one eye open.
I'm like, what's the ending? So thank you very much for being a guest on this episode. I really enjoyed chatting about 80s vampires.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really love talking about them too. It's great to like that, share the love with another fan.
My chat there with Natalie Greer about 80s vampire films, and in particular 2 films that we feel were kind of the best of that era. So that was 1986's Vamp with Grace Jones, directed by Richard Wenk. And then there is 1987's The Lost Boys, absolute classic, best soundtrack ever of any film ever, perhaps my favorite vampire film of all time. So there was plenty of other vampire films in the 80s. As I said, there was a huge upsurgence of it, bringing the sex and the modernity back to the vampire. So there were films such as Fright Night, The Hunger, and Near Dark, as well as a few other kind of lesser known ones. So what did you think of this week's episode? Did you agree with our 2 choices for 80s vampires? Do you kind of feel that Vamp is very underrated and deserves a whole lot more recognition? And do you feel that kind of The Lost Boys, it's a bit overrated? Whatever your point of view may be, please let us know over on Instagram or Facebook. So that is at What a Scream Podcast, or through email, whatascreampodcast@gmail.com. We are also on Letterboxd, so you can keep up to date with all the films that we have previously chatted about, that we will be chatting about in future episodes, so you can kind of do a watch along and not have films spoiled on you while you're watching them. I am also on Twitter, what_scream, which is like, I know, the shittest handle ever, but that's just what I was given, and I can't figure out how to change it because I am a Twitter twit, let's just say. So you can find us on there anyway. And as always, I hope you are staying safe and you are looking after yourself, practicing some self-care in the form of watching horror movies. And don't forget to also check out the mini episodes, which we put up every week. It's review episodes with me and my sister, and we chat about recent horror releases. Mainly, they've been a lot about Shudder releases. So if you have Shudder, you can also do a watch along with us there. So thank you very much for listening. And as always, stay horrific. Goodbye. Shouldn't be scared of Dracula. Shouldn't be scared of